Hi, welcome to Angel's Nook, where anything can become a canvas for creativity. Be prepared to be inspired by a wide range of projects and finishing techniques. Be sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any of the new videos.
Hold up. My mum just turned a pile of junk in a baby blankie into a boulder? Now that is what I call a stone-cold makeover. Let's see how she pulls this off. Join us in watching her work, her Angel's Nook magic.
To start creating the base for the rock and what the form of the rock is going to be, we used pegboard. It does not have to be pegboard. We happen to have it, and using what you have to me is better than going and buying something. But you do need something that is sturdy. This is only a 1/4 inch thick. The nice part about the pegboard is it allowed me to see the position of the support buckets underneath and let me outline where they were so that then I could figure out how I wanted to position the base for the lighthouse. This is the back. We did not want it straight on here, so I needed markings for this. We have already played with mixing concrete 4-leveler over fabric. In this case, it's part of a piece of a small quilt. We're going to use the larger piece of very soft, well-worn quilt to create this. We draped this over a red Solo cup just to see what it would do. It is incredibly hard. This was soaked in the concrete mixture and then left to dry, but you can see it's also got a rocky texture to it, which is going to allow us to either knock down, sand down different areas of it to get the look we want. This will not be draped exactly like this. I just wanted to know how sturdy any of these would be. So then if you look at this base, lighthouses are often out on an outcropping. So the edge of this is a very organic line. Inside here is where the base of the lighthouse will sit, and it will have additional materials over it to make it just blend into this. It will not be concrete around the house. It will be concrete, the concrete leveler underneath the house. But these organic lines on it will allow me to form some shapes that will look like cliff and stone going down the outcropping where the lighthouse is supposed to be. We have been working on creating a mold for the shape of the rock. This will stay flat on top for the lighthouse to sit on, and there'll be other pieces added to it. But underneath this is kind of a hodgepodge that's going to look very crazy, but it doesn't require holding any weight once this is finished with the concrete. This is a super thin, this poor quilt has been washed who knows how many times. It was a quick Goodwill find for about $3 to serve the purpose of what we wanted. This is not exactly how the stone will look, but you can see that there's places where there's going to be shape to it, so it's not just falling straight down. All of this is going to be trimmed off to form an edge down here at the bottom that's going to finish this off and allow mulch to come up against it and not have any spaces between it. And if you look underneath, it is definitely a crazy piece. This is the piece that I showed you earlier with the organic edge on it, and these are the pieces that have been screwed together, glued together, and then there is a base of 3 big buckets underneath that will stay there. It doesn't matter if these are rot, if they fall out. Once this is dry, they can be completely removed if needed. They're just forming a shape and a form that I can use to shape this quilt when it's soaked into the concrete and make it look like a free-flowing rock. That'll be the first step to making this look like a real rock. The quilt has at this point been trimmed, and we actually put 2 wire handles into each side of it, one of them marked as a side that we would know where to center this, so that when we got it wet with the leveler and pulled it out, we could align it pretty quickly over the mold that's there. The entire quilt is not down into the trash can, which has been lined with 2 heavy-duty contractor bags, because you've got to layer the leveler into it and on it, or you're going to have lots of areas that are completely dry. You also have to do the leveler compound mixes in no more than a gallon at a time, or it will dry faster than you can get it into the quilt, and that causes you to have lots of lumps and not the soakage that you need it to have. The more leveler that you get into the bucket and into the quilt, the heavier it gets. So this really becomes quite a cardio workout to work the quilt, to lift it, turn it, move it. You're moving it all over the place to get that leveler to mix on all sides of the quilt. This is definitely a 2-person job. The quilt is very heavy, and it has to be arranged so that you've got at least a 4-inch flat border all the way around the outside, so that it's coming completely down, and you have enough to be able to have some slack to move it into the different levels and shapes that you need. You have to work quickly to get your shapes in place because this dries pretty rapidly. The weight of it was such that it was pulling it off of the levels I was creating over the forms. So Jim had the brilliant idea to quickly grab the staple gun and to staple into the pieces and forms that we had underneath, which held it in place and didn't show at all once it was dry. You definitely need to step back a few times and look at the shape and see if there's anything you need to readjust. I had thought that a wire bristle brush was going to help me the most on this, but I found that my hands worked better just to knock off the loose, larger pieces that I did not want to dry permanently on there. This has now been drying for about 18 hours. It's still got more dry that needs to happen with it. We've turned the round back so that it's getting more direct sun from where the sun comes from on our driveway. The back here obviously did not get as much concrete in it, so it's got some give in it. I honestly felt like an old-time washerwoman trying to get all of the concrete mix the floor level would mix into the quilt, because this was a twin size quilt. So I knew there was going to be thick and thin areas in it, but that's not an issue because it's got its shape held here. So now we're going to mix up more of the same concentration, the same ratio of 2.5 parts of the leveler to 1 part water, and coat all of this, paint it on, so that this also gets much harder. Over on this side, where it got into the quilt really well, it's good and hard and gives very little. You have to mix the leveler in small batches as you're going to brush it on, because it wants to set up fast, it wants to settle out and make clumps, and then you can no longer brush it on. You have to swirl the brush into the leveler as you load the brush, because it tries to settle out and not really fill the brush. I'm using a cheap brush for the rough surfaces. All the folds give this stone a natural look, and also are adding strength because they're acting the same way that arches in architecture do. We're on another step for this faux stone. It was completely coated in the floor leveler. That was left to dry inside, outside. We did 2 coats on the outside of it. Then we coated the outside of it after it was fully dried. It had been baking out in the sun down here in Florida over for pretty much a full day and overnight. And then we got a waterproof mortar, mixed it to a strength that would let us brush it on, which was pretty much 2 parts of the mortar to 1 part of water, sometimes a little bit more because of the heat down here, just to make it so it was paintable to put it on. That has made this really, really hard. We turned it over, pulled out the everything that was underneath, all the buckets, the cardboard pieces, everything. And then we also lifted out that masonite piece that had a pegboard, because it did not adhere to the concrete at all. It just did not attach. So what we did is we put a layer of mortar underneath this top edge, placed the pegboard back in, pushed it down, weighted it down, then added a layer of mortar on top of that, and skim coated the inside of the entire piece with mortar. It's now sturdy enough, it's not going to need the buckets under it anymore. To help make this waterproof, since it's going to be sitting outside, to just adding more insurance, because we tend to do that. Because when you put this much work into something, you do not want it to see it start breaking down the first year that you have it outside. So the edges were trimmed so that they're not out large anymore, but just enough to help keep it from settling down into the sandy soil here. Once that was done, the edge of this got 2 heavy coats of polyurethane to seal in the cloth that was sandwiched in between the layers of the concrete, to make that more waterproof, to at least begin to help that. And then the inside lip of this was coated in a Flex rubber seal, a Flexol rubber seal, both along this edge and about 8 inches up into here. So between the waterproof mortar, the sealing that we've done, and that rubber spray-on rubber film, this should last for a very, very long time. What I'm ready to do right now is to put the base coat of color on this, and since this is concrete, it's going to spatter. So I have picked out clothes. I don't care if I get paint on them because I know what's going to happen. And I'll put a base coat on this, and then tomorrow after this is dried really well, I will start adding some faux coloring to it. But this will give me a neutral color to it. It is not far from this, but a little bit warmer taupe. It is a warm taupe that is called Oyster by All-in-One Paint by Heirloom Tradition. It is exterior grade, so water is not going to be an issue hitting this at all. So, here we go. I've also chosen my oldest round brush to do this with, and my oldest roller, because I know there's going to be rough areas on here. I'm not loading the whole brush. I'm loading the tip. The round brush is really helpful to wiggle into these grooves so that I know this base coat of paint is going to get down in here. I may not even need the roller, but I wanted to have it handy to smooth this out because I don't want a bunch of brush strokes on my rock, but I think it's going to be fine. I'm wanting a rock that looks more like the rock on the lighthouse. So that's why I'm going with the taupe. That's my base color. If I had wanted a grayer rock, I would have started with a neutral gray, a neutral warm gray on here as my base color and worked from there for what that color of rock looks like. And I'm also going back over this because I don't want to leave any excess paint anywhere on this. I don't want runs because all of that will show up in my faux finish. I'm tapping this because I can see clearly where this is starting to pool. That would create really smooth valleys that this rock would not have. So I'm going to make sure I'm catching those before I leave it alone to finish drying. I'm directing my brush strokes on here in the direction of the grooves that were brushed into it in the final brushes of the mortar coat, because water coming down rocks like this wouldn't go sideways. It would erode down in fine lines coming down into it, some cracks going this way, but most everything, the water off of a flat surface coming down would create vertical grooves. So I want to maintain that when I'm adding the paint. I don't want to obliterate that. I want to make sure that that's still showing through my paint coat. Yay, that coat's done. Next coat starts the fun. Fun part's about to begin, at least the fun part for me. It's dry brushing different colors onto this to create highs and lows that regular stone has. I'm going to be working both up and down in that direction with paint and stroke dry brushing. And then I'm also going to work into this some horizontal layers of color, which is what you see in natural stone, and especially along stone that has been weathered with either in canyons or along the coasts with the ocean affecting it. And since this is going to eventually look more like an outcropping for cliffs for the lighthouse, that's the method that I'm going to work with. So it's having very, very little paint on your brush to start with, and then tapping most of it off and then working with it. You can always add more, but you muddy it if you have too much, or you just, it looks like big paint strokes, which you don't want. It's going to be a little trickier with this surface that's rough, but at the same time, the roughness of the surface is what's going to give this a much more natural stone look when I get done with it. So I've got a variety of different colors out that have already been stirred so that they're ready to go. A couple of antiquing gels that are a little bit longer to dry, that give a little bit more blend time, and a spray bottle of water to grab if I need to take it off. If you have too much on something, you can take it off quickly, but you have to be careful because then you can also run and create mud in your paint, a muddy look in your paint as well. So the first color I'm going to put on is not going to show very much difference against this. It's just going to start to give it some texture. The additional colors will show more, and normally you're going to work dark to light, but you're also going to be thinking within these areas where there is depth, the valleys are going to have more dark, the outer edge is going to have more light, or at least a white or a creamier color added to it to bring that surface forward into the light. And I'll probably be using the top of this several times just to see what the color is looking like as I start to use it. I have very, very little paint on this, and I'm going to tap most of it off. Then you're just going to barely touch the surface. I can turn my brush, but you can see it's getting some highs and lows on that. That's exactly the amount I wanted. Again, I'm going to come back out of it, tap most of it off. Sometimes you can grab enough off of your brush on the plate. There's enough left. My brush is just barely touching this surface to get into the grooves where I want it a little heavier. I turn my brush. Most of the paint is off of your brush. You can do a little bit of blending with it, but you don't want to do any of that blending while it's first going on, or you just wind up with solid paint. I'm going a different direction on this because that's not got the vertical striations that I put into the paint. I'm sorry, into the cement. Here, I want to get a shadow in here, so I want more of the color to come in. in here as well, because there's a groove down in there. Here, I'm going to go at a 45 across this. And that's going to capture just the high points of this. It's going to start to bring out all the roughness of the stone. Anywhere I've got a groove that might have shadow, I'm going to put more of that color up in there. Across here, I just want the front edge of this to start coming off and showing up. A very, very light touch. With the chip brush. Really starting to pull this out. It'll be much more evident in some of the other colors that I use, how this works, but I have to layer according to the colors, how I want the final color to come out. Going back before I forget. Put some up into the edge. Most all of this is going to have grass on it, so I just have to make sure the very outer edges. Another spot that I'm going at a 45. The color I'm using, I forgot to mention, I think, is Stonehenge. Beautiful beige. I've used a paper towel to get the excess of the paint off the bristles of this, and I also wiped off the paper plate. I don't have much of this paint left. This is probably going to be the last project with this particular antiquing gel, so I'm not really worried about getting a mix in here. So I'm not going to take the time to go in the house and wash the brush or grab another one. So I'm going to start in now with a brown antiquing gel, and I'm going to have to be very careful with how much I put on, or I will get way too much. Once I have most of it off, I can use those dry bristles. Once almost all the paint is off, and I mean, there is just barely anything on there. The bristles actually almost look dry. That's what gives me the ability to get these striations. When I stop getting striations, I can go back and use my brush to blend in so it's not a stripey. It's just that hint of a stripe that's in there. And this is starting to look more like stone. All the colors that I've put on so far, from the base coat all the way into this, are all still peeking through. Nothing has been covered out, gotten rid of. You can also pounce to get a mottled look on this. And where I have the more uneven spaces of rippling, that is the best way to get in there and to highlight those features. I've done this quite a bit, but starting out new doing it, I would highly recommend that you get photos and look at what does real stone look like. Where does it have its highs and lows? What kind of colors are in there? The next color I'm going to apply is black, but it has to be very, very sparingly applied. Too much and it's just gonna mess up everything else that's been done. So this is gonna be one of those things, I may get it right the first time going around, or I may have to go back and look and add highlights. But that's all this is doing. It's just adding a little bit more texture and highlight. And again, it's super, super light with the brush. You just are barely touching the surface, so if you've never dry brushed before, you really need to practice on a scrap piece of wood to see exactly how hard you're pressing, because it's very easy to just suddenly have a paint stroke instead of dry brush. And you can see that this time I'm not going over every surface or every area. It's just very, very random light spots. The black is very good for adding into more of the shadows, because it doesn't take very much of it. And you see that it has started to deepen the shadows that are within there. Or places that I did not put shadow into before, because I didn't in all of these crevices. Now is the time to use the black to darken in there. Pouncing is sometimes the very best for that. The next thing I'm going to work on is creating some horizontal lines of a rusty color with some black. They're going to smudge together to create the layers of like mineral and iron in here. Very little water is being added because I don't want to reactivate all of this, but the brick color for the iron is drying faster than I wanted it to. So I will do a little misting to keep this where I want it to be. And I hope you can see that I'm not trying to do a straight level line in here, because that is not what lines in nature do. They're rock formations. They've been formed very violently over time. There's enough moisture in my brush right now. create the look I want. And there's some translucence so that the vertical variegations and the lower are intermingling. Yesterday I failed to realize that the camera battery had died on me while I was working on the last step of this stone. So what I had done with it is taken a wadded up piece of paper towel, dipped very little paint, blotted most of it off onto here, and then randomly blotted over this to mute in the white lines that had been put in. There has also been drilled and put in a vent on the far side over there and down here where my hand is pointing to get some cross ventilation underneath this since it's hollow and we have such high humidity here. It'll help prevent mold and mildew from building underneath there and keep the airflow going underneath this. So I'm happy with how this has turned out, so I'm not going to do anything else to the stone. I will paint these before they're glued in to camouflage them so that they hide within this really well. Thank you.
So, yeah, I'm half Brittany Spaniel and half Border Collie, and afraid of water. What are you afraid of? Buttons? Really? You're kidding. Come on, you can do it.